My name's Ed Piskor.
My name's Tom Scholey.
Welcome to the first episode of what I hope is a long series called Read More Comics, Moore, and we do not bury the lead here. I want to reinvestigate Alan Moore's comics. There's many that I've read, all the big ones, obviously. I'm kind of astounded at just the tremendous body of work that the guy has in his bibliography, and I want an excuse to read into a bunch of that work. The way that I have always manipulated my career is to go down these deep rabbit holes, and ultimately what will come out is a comic book. Hip Hop Family Tree, X-Men's a version of that, even my Wizzywood comic. I'm not interested in reading all of Alan Moore's comics and then making an ersatz wannabe Alan Moore comic.
Right.
Yeah. But we have this platform right here, and I figured why not just continue our book club trend on the Kayfabe channel and do a more Alan Moore-centric series of videos. I think eventually the set is going to change over time. Mm-hmm. Certainly, I imagine, say November 1st, the day when all of the Halloween decorations go on like a 50% sale. We'll start to have like little skulls, maybe some candles.
Yeah, some pentagrams.
Yeah, exactly. And my thoughts with the series, let's not necessarily go in a linear fashion. Even though we do have access to every single Alan Moore comic that he's ever laid his hands on, basically, perhaps we will get to all that stuff. Figured why not begin with Miracleman issue 1. We have a very international audience, Tom. Do we call him Miracleman? Do we call him Marvel Man?
Well, I mean, Miracleman is a mouthful. And I was kind of shocked when Marvel got the rights to this stuff that they didn't just call him Marvel Man.
But the original series was serialized in Warrior Magazine from the very beginning, issue number 1. So the material that is in this issue is really the first 3 chapters, even though there's 4 chapters in this first issue. The very first thing, which we'll talk about in a second, I believe may have been done uniquely for this volume. Okay. It's not the first Miracleman.
Yeah, because I have a lot of questions about that first sub-chapter.
Yeah,
so.
Yeah, it's really good. So this material initially came out in 1982. In earlier Wizard episodes, one of the things that I made mention of is the fact that these chapters of Miracleman, you could call it Marvel Man, I'll call it
Okay, right.
These chapters are about 6 to 8 pages in length. They're very satisfying. A lot occurs. You know, it makes me very comfortable dissing the people who have that like extremely decompressed storytelling in their jobber comics at like Marvel or DC, where it's like they can't communicate a thought in 22 pages. It's like, shame on you. You know, this guy's doing that in 6 pages. We will perhaps explore a couple of the situations in this exact issue where a few shortcuts had to be taken because of those page limitations.
When we were like discussing Akira, you know, we're looking at another like serialized work that then is collected for something else, and how nicely it works in that collected format. Like it doesn't feel like, oh, it's just some serialized magazine thing that they're putting. And I feel like this is like even though you can see the seams, you can see where one chapter begins and ends, it does have like this issue has like a nice shape to it.
Yeah,
like the way the story goes.
Right. If it was one chapter less, it wouldn't necessarily have that urgency of a cliffhanger that we are left with. You know, they very wisely hooked it up that way. Should we talk about Marvel Man?
Yeah. I guess just the history of it in England. I guess in like the 50s, they or maybe starting in the 40s, they were reprinting Captain Marvel comics. You know, Shazam, who's called Shazam now. It did well there, and then the supply ran out.
The lawsuit happens with DC. You know, copyright infringement, Superman, too close to Superman, blah, blah, blah. On a dime, the Captain Marvel comics are done.
Yeah, cease to exist, yeah.
And, you know, some erstwhile publisher, little snidely Whiplash Pringles can drawing-looking guy with the handlebar mustache, decides why not create our own Captain Marvel.
Yeah, it was like, we ran out of Captain Marvel comics to show, so we got to keep this thing going somehow. And then, like, the wording of it is real funny. Like, they say, like, something in the magazine where it's like, we always thought of Captain Marvel as a Marvel Man. And so we decided to, you know, and then they create this new character called Marvel Man that's going to pick up, of, like a very like thinly veiled, like as close as you can get without it being copyright infringement copy. And like the differences are kind of interesting to me, and you see how Moore really like attaches to those differences. But yeah, so then from then on, it was this sort of Captain Marvel esque comic that ran for I don't know how many more years, but then eventually,
It stopped in 1963.
Okay.
And Alan Moore's comic begins in 1982. So it's about 19. We'll call it 20 years. I like nickel and dime dates,
Yeah.
man. That actually made me think about just how nostalgia works with us now, because I'm a 37-year-old guy. You're 40 years old, whatever. We have 20-year-old memories now, and we're also in the position to make things ourselves, and we have peers who make things themselves. So you get a Michelle Fife Bloodshot comic. You get an Eddie P. X-Men comic.
Tom Shelley GoBots comic.
You see?
Yeah.
We get an Alan Moore Miracleman comic.
Yeah, and 1963 obviously is like a really important year to him personally. It keeps showing up, and like maybe later we could talk about some of the things that make 1963 such like kind of buzz for him at least, but also for like the larger world.
Let's jump into this thing. We should always remember the artist, like not give these guys short shrift.
Totally, yeah.
The artist of this issue is Gary Leach.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with his work?
I mean, from this,
Yeah.
and then like some other stuff here and there, but like mainly from this. And like looking at this again, I really love his work. Like it's really great. It's really beautiful. It's kind of you can tell there's like a lot of photo referencing going on, but it's not like too stiff. It's atmospheric. There's a lot of black, and when they change artists on this, it is pretty jarring because he and there's a million reasons why the art looks different. Like you said, the different format that it was made for. It was made for like a larger size, magazine size, and then shrunken down, which makes it look extra tight. There's a bunch of reasons, but his like this reread really reminded me like how much I like his work on this series.
I would call it like a in the Paul Galassi school.
Mm-hmm, totally, yeah, and I'm a huge Galassi fan, so
I am as well. So we have chapter 1.
Yeah.
It's basically Alan Moore's introduction to the new generation about who and what this character and this universe is all about, man. He's doing his damnedest to do just an amazing Golden Age strip with all that entails, man. He's a very smart guy, but he is consciously indulging in the silliness of these old comics.
Yeah. Which is part of the story.
It is.
That these are there's a reason why these are silly stories. That within the an in-story reason for that.
That's the amazing thing that we will kind of unpack in this issue, is that there are many little things that he introduces in this first issue that bear fruit 10 issues later.
Yeah, he's like planting all kinds of seeds. And okay, here's my I didn't want to look up the actual answer to this, but I always had the question about this thing. Is this an actual old story that now my guess is no, that this is not an actual old story that he left totally unchanged. Is it an actual old story that he changed some of the dialogue and maybe changed a couple panels here and there? Or is it a totally like faked old comic like we sometimes do?
Right.
Is it that, because like any of those answers is great, and the fact that I don't know, as somebody who like understands the kayfabe,
they compliment.
Don't know exactly.
They compliment to the creative team in that respect. Like I never thought about that. Like I just automatically assumed that this is an Alan Moore thing. But hey, what do I know?
Because the art is so spot on, and it doesn't look like Gary Leach. Like the final page looks like not like Gary Leach, but it looks like.
Let's talk about that final page.
Okay, yeah, because you're watching like this old story that's, like you said, is silly, but then has little things that resonate where it's like, oh, they're from the future year of 1981.
Right.
But it's like this totally different, sci-fi world is 1981. So that instantly gets your attention. It's like a retro future.
Especially if you were a contemporary reader in 1982, when it's like, okay, this was last year.
Yeah, exactly. And then it's like they got terms like the science Gestapo, which is so Alan Moore. Like that's totally an Alan Moore thing.
We introduce all characters.
Yeah,
Dickie
all the
Dauntless. Johnny Bates, Kid Marvel Man.
Yeah, Kid Marvel Man gets introduced first, which I think is really good too, because of his importance in this story, and like introduced in like such a different way than how he ends up, like just by the end of this volume even. There's like one panel where it's like showing like all the stuff, and then they're in like Saigon, and they're like, burn their villages, burn the and it's like, and like the word Saigon, look, you can see like the rectangle around it where it was pasted. So if it was like an old comic that they repurposed, it was like, to Alan Moore, it's like, oh, this would really hit home if we make like a, like a Vietnam War reference, which pops up in a lot of his work. Like Vietnam War is like a big part in a lot of his work. So yeah, you have all that, and then like a contradiction, like a time travel contradiction that's so ridiculous and stupid and begs you to like say like, what the heck's going on? And then yeah, that final page.
We just zoom in on what seems like an almost lifeless, like a real doll version of Miracleman, because they take 8 panels to do it, and he doesn't move a slight inch. So he's just like a lifeless corpse, practically, with a big smile on his face, and we just zoom into his eyeball.
Yeah, with a Nietzsche quote. Give you the Superman, he is this madness, whatever the quote is. You're reading this like whimsical, like kind of stupid Golden Age comic or Silver Age comic, whatever, and then that like stops you in the tracks, and it's like a horror movie moment, or it's like it's just really disturbing, and like what a simple thing that's going on, in terms of like comics making. It's so simple, but it does, it's like, okay, there's something really like bad going on here, or.
One thing that we are going to discover as we unravel all of these comics that we'll end up talking about on Read More Comics is that it is very clear that Moore has a lot of command on how the pages are composed in a lot of the comics. It'll be very apparent once we inevitably get to some of his 2000 AD work, where you can simply read through a prog, just page after page, and you will just notice the design aesthetic of the Alan Moore stories stands apart from every other comic in the thing. So what Moore does, man, he reins in a lot of these artists in the same way that a Harvey Kurtzman would have reined in a Wally Wood or a Bill Elder in the old EC days of Frontline Combat, Two-Fisted Tales, and Mad Magazine.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of formal stuff that he's doing. And like, let's go to what in this issue would be Chapter 2, but for the Brits out there was really Chapter 1 in Warrior Magazine #1, man. So we have those 16:9 aspect ratio landscape panels, which are panels that I've never seen at that time. You wouldn't see those in American comics.
Yeah, American comics at that time were very vertical. You get thin vertical panels for some reason, but like the thin horizontal panels, you wouldn't really see. That is like when you talk about decompressed storytelling and stuff, like that was a big like aesthetic part of the widescreen comics. That's it, widescreen comics.
Juxtaposing this chapter with what we just saw with that crazy looking Golden Age story hits you like a ton of bricks. We're seeing a lot of photo ref with this truck coming down the street.
A lot of Moore's work is sort of like we're living in the fallout of the 60s. Like the dream of the 60s has gone sour and stuff. So these are revolutionaries or whatever, or started out as revolutionaries, and now they're like, wait a second, like we're going to start a revolution of the people, of the people, for the people, by the people, or whatever, and now we're transporting plutonium, or we're going to steal plutonium to sell to some foreign power that's going to, do such and such.
Yeah, the very next page, we have the modern day iteration of Miracleman. He's born. Mike Moran is having yet another dream.
Yeah, a dream of flying, which is like, Alan Moore, it's like, it's a really good idea to like all this fantastical stuff start with something we can relate to, and like we've all dreamed of flying, so it's like a great starting point for it.
What the Kayfabers are going to realize as we continue with Miracleman stuff over time, I'm not going to say the next episode is going to be Miracleman, but when we unpack this thing further, this is a Lovecraftian story, and it was only upon well, I've basically personally discovered Lovecraft myself, actually read all of his work within the past year. So that was in my consciousness.
Right.
And Lovecraft is a big piece piece of the Alan Moore stew.
It is, and I didn't realize until recently, because when we were talking about doing some Alan Moore stuff, I started reading a bunch of like Alan Moore like books and like early stuff, and like one of the earliest comics that he like drew himself in maybe like the student paper or whatever was like this Lovecraftian fish people kind of like drawing, and it's like that was you know, when he was doing like Neonomicon and Providence, his like most recent works. So it was there from the beginning, and so yeah, obviously huge Lovecraftian fan. There's like literal like Lovecraftian like monsters and creatures all through his work, but then also the way he writes. The
Yes.
purple bruised prose is so Lovecraftian.
Right, absolutely, man. I don't know that he used the word batrachian much, but he definitely visually has some batrachian aliens and stuff. What's a trope of Lovecraft? The human experience isn't equipped to describe this or that, or that, you know, this word, that color, that building, this alien. Now guys like Gary Leach have to go do that.
Right.
How do you draw the
unseeable or the ununderstandable?
And that will be in later chapters of this, man. Mike Moran has that dream, wakes up with his wife, Liz. I like to think she's a cartoonist. They say illustrator.
Right, yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of, like, auto-bio going on in this, too. Like,
I love it.
Because, you know, Mike Moran he's a freelancer, and he's middle-aged, you know, and, like, Alan Moore maybe was in his 30s at this point or whatever, but, like, at least felt like that was middle-aged, even though we kind of know better now. And then, like, his wife, yeah, she's an artist. We're seeing maybe, like, inside of, you know, Moore's life. And,
I'm all about that, because... Yeah. Another person whose work I've been reading over the past couple of years, like book after book after book, is Stephen King. And there's a writer in every book. You know, in every Stephen King story, man. If it doesn't focus on a writer, there will be an integral character who is a writer. So why don't we make comics that have cartoonists in it?
Sure.
Write what you know.
Yeah.
We don't quite get the full aspect of Mike Moran in this issue, where when we see him in the future, like, you know, he'll have man titties, little pot belly, maybe a little bullfrog neck starting. You know, he's a middle-aged guy.
Yeah, he's a schlub.
Schlub. Yeah, well said, Ben. Well said. He heads off to the paper.
There's a protest of like a nuclear power plant or whatever, which again, like very 80s kind of thing. Like you don't really see that anymore. Like I don't know if maybe like because nuclear power has been like phased out to a large degree or whatever, but that was like a trope. You know, and it was in a lot of comics too, like protesting, you know, nuclear power, and so there's like the photos of little kids saying, "Oh, soaking in some radiation and stuff." Mike Moran is there to like cover some kind of like the protest or whatever, talk to some people, see what's up.
And goddamn it, if these terrorists don't show up right then, man, when he's not at his best. But he starts to have those visions, and that's a really cool couple of panels. Like, how do you communicate that? You know, there's a word on the tip of your tongue, so to speak. You know, like how do you visually get that across? And Gary Leach, Alan Moore, they handle it beautifully. You know, just this kind of like smeary set of words that are kind of the mirror reverse.
Yeah, you see the mirror, and it's like red rum or whatever. You know, it's like atomic spelled backwards is Komota, which is his magic. That's his Shazam that turns him into Marvel Man. And
he does. It's not pretty.
Yeah.
You don't want to be around Marvel Man when he says the word Komota.
Yeah, because like in comics, like for like Captain Marvel and stuff, when you would see the lightning strike, sometimes there'd be something that kind of looks like a mushroom cloud around it, you know, like and so more, you know, studies that, and like the guys get barbecued. The terrorists and stuff that are near him get barbecued by it, and then that ends up being like a plot point like later in the story too. Like just, you know, he's laying out all the bits and pieces.
As soon as we get that piece, man, with him saying Komota and the people around him burning up, man, we now have postmodern Miracleman, you know, because Moore is taking all of this old material and just putting an extra level of thought into the character and trying to move and shake and see how it can work in these more cynical 1980s.
I guess like maybe we could take a minute and talk about super folks. Like maybe we can get to this because there's other more works that like reference super folks even more. But there's this novel called Super Folks. I think the author's last name's Meyer. I can't think of the exact details. But Super Folks is like kind of cited as being like a big influence on a lot of more superhero work. And so part of that was, I think it was like there was like a Superman analog who was like middle-aged, forgot he was Superman, all this stuff, and then like finally one day wakes up and finds out he's Superman. So just kind of put a pin in that maybe for like, later discussions of super folks.
Miracleman thwarts the bad guys as superheroes do, and showboats a little bit at the very end, man. He kind of like blasts off into outer space, essentially, and doesn't escape the view of cameras. And that's how that first chapter ends. I'm back.
Yeah, and it's a real nice drawing too. He's like, the triumphant, hero and striking the pose in the air. And like that's one thing like people sometimes talk about with superhero comics is like, is it that much of a bummer to fly? Why do you have to be like, could you smile once in a while? Like, so here's somebody like enjoying their powers, at least for the moment.
For the moment. Moore gives them one.
Yeah.
The next chapter begins, man. Chapter 3 in this story here. Miracleman decides to stay in that form. It's been a while. When he achieves his superhero form, all the memories come flooding back. And he's a little reluctant to jump back into the shape of, the middle-aged schlubby guy. Goes back home, kissing up on the wife, touching her. She's digging it. And then she looks at the dude, is like, who the heck are you?
Yeah, that's interesting too. Like you were saying with like the artist's job and stuff. It is like, how do you communicate this thing of like, okay, here's a guy who is not your husband, but looks enough like your husband, like looks different enough from your husband that you're like, who the hell are you? But then enough like your husband that when he starts to say that you're like, oh yeah, I do kind of see that, and then they show his like their wedding picture where it's like him when he was like 20 or whatever, and it's like, okay, I look at that, I can kind of see the resemblance.
Yeah, and it's not spot on, which is I'm glad you pointed that out. That is amazing, and it's the difference between like just adding a few extra lines to a face.
I think of like Stardust, the super wizard, who's like another like important character to Moore, pops up in his work.
Great Fletcher Hanks.
The Fletcher Hanks, and it's like this idea of somebody who's like so handsome they're ugly, like so right. Muscular and like that's part of Frankenstein too. Like in the novel Frankenstein, he builds what he thinks is like a Superman. He builds something that's like better than a human being, better proportions, more heroic, whatever. And then when he's done and he gets a good look at it, he's like, this thing's ugly. This is scary. This is not.
They didn't have the word uncanny valley back then in Victorian times. He finally convinces the wife that yes, it is Mike. Mike is in there, and the floodgates have opened. All of these memories have come back. And he gives his origin story. Probably very similar to the Mick Anglo origin story to Marvel Man. I'm not well versed in those comics.
Me neither. It's a great origin story. And this, like around shortly before Alan Moore made this comic, there was a show, The Greatest American Hero.
Yeah, sure.
And this is the part of the story that like really reminds me of Greatest American Hero, where it's like, okay, I got this superhero thing, and now I have to explain it to my girlfriend. And she is having none of, like, she just can't keep a straight face through any of it. And then also, like, later on, like, she helps him, like, learn his powers and stuff, which is in both things. So I think he's kind of, Moore's kind of riffing on that. It was very recent. Moore is, like, very, drenched in pop culture. Like, he keeps up with pop culture. And so he had to be watching that show or have seen that show. So, like, there's just that. But, yeah, it's a great scene, beautifully written scene.
The way he's communicating it is we have this modern sensibility to the art and writing, but now you're having these characters who are a little bit more sophisticated of a viewer as a consumer than, the comic reader of the 40s will say. And that's the story of the origin. He's just like regurgitating this old comic book story. That is goofy.
Yeah.
Dickie Dauntless.
Right,
what kind of name is that?
Dickie with the stupid name is what they refer to him from then on. And it's like, okay, coming out of my mouth, yes, this sounds really stupid, but this is my fucking life,
He has some question. There's a little bit of, not confusion, but you get the sense that he's not 100% buying it,
Right, yeah, because it's just, and I don't... Like, I think it's a very common human thing where, like, you start telling somebody a story of something that happened or whatever, and then their interpretation of it, like, is, like, so different from how you and it kind of makes you rethink, and then you're kind of like embarrassed in that moment of like, oh I didn't realize this story I was telling was actually, I thought it was this, but it's actually this, but now that I'm saying, and like he captures that here.
Absolutely. He needed some MacGuffin to bring the character into the modern day, to create ignorance within the character so that like all these memories could come back. And the way Moore decides to do that is concoct a story that happens in 63, conveniently when the Marvelman comic ends. They approach some kind of weird spaceship. Atomic bomb explodes. He gets, thrust wherever the hell he gets thrust.
Yeah.
Loses all memory. Poor Dickie Dauntless. We're not going to see him in these comics, man. He smashed to smithereens, man, and liquefied. And we're not quite sure what happened to Johnny Bates at this moment. Johnny Bates being Kid Miracleman.
This setup is kind of like Captain America, where it's like the Captain America, like for publishing reasons, Captain America went away for a while, and then when they brought him back, it's like, well, where's Captain America been all these years? And then they come up with a story kind of similar, where he's, him and his friend are on this exploding thing. His friend dies, he gets frozen, forgets, and then he comes back years later, and he's like, what the hell happened? It's kind of like that, it's like a very similar setup. The Marvelman origin, I like the differences between it and the Captain Marvel origin, where it's like a 1950s version of a wizard. It's not like a wizard from antiquity. It's like a astrophysicist wizard, like a nuclear wizard who's like, I'm Guntag Borghelm, this like sort of Swedish, sounding name, and I'm going to give you the key harmonic, of the this like sound based, magic or what, and magic that has just enough science or pseudoscience underneath that like you can buy it a little more than if it were like a purely magical origin. I really like that.
So as he describes his origin story, the media coverage of the event at the protest, it's leaking across the world essentially, and lo and behold, Johnny Bates, Kid Marvelman, alive and well, sees the footage, smashes a TV with some supernatural ability.
Yeah, there's like a lightning or like some burst of light, and he's like, he says something like, "You're gonna, he's gonna ruin everything" or whatever.
And that's how that chapter ends. Mike Moran, Marvelman, gets the call from Johnny Bates. Come to such and such headquarters, man, of some
Sunburst Electronics or whatever it's called, and the symbol is the Marvel Captain Marvel symbol for the company.
Right, yeah. Yeah, so it turns out Johnny Bates still alive. Moran, the wife, they go visit him. And he's a Adrian Veidt.
Oh, totally, yeah.
Kind of character.
Yeah, because this is, like, we're on the road, like, with this comic, we're on the road to Watchmen. Like, this is, like, we're going to see little bits and pieces that end up, in that. And he's, Captain of Industry, and like a Horatio Alger type story, at least on the surface. Like, hey, I pulled myself up by the bootstraps and did this, and this, and now look, and you could do this too if you just put your mind to it, like I did.
Yeah, and Mike isn't quite buying it, and this is the Alan Moore stuff that I really, really appreciate, man, because there are these ideas that he has that feel so simple on the surface that just simply have never been explored in the original comics. Original comics in this case being Captain Marvel, we'll say. Why not explore the idea of, okay, so Billy Batson is a little schmuck, and then he says Shazam, and gets to become Captain Marvel, this like amazing superhero.
Yeah.
It's possible that young Billy Batson with enough steroids and such could grow up to look like Captain Marvel. So what happens if you just stay? Like, there's never been an explanation. There's never been, like, a Spawn hourglass.
Right, life meter.
Yeah, there's no life meter. Why not just stay the big guy? And Alan Moore explores that here. Mike Moran does not buy what Johnny Bates is saying about, pulling himself up from the bootstraps, all of that.
And he says, like, I really wanted to believe it. Like, it's like he said, because the real truth is like so ugly and scary, and like I have to deal with that, where it would be so much easier for everybody involved if I did believe you, but it doesn't wash.
How does Mike test him?
He pushes him, he pushes him off the cliff.
Yeah, well, they're on a giant skyscraper.
Yeah.
Yeah, the terrace of like a giant citadel essentially, and just pushes him the hell off, and then we discover that Kid Marvelman just decided to keep that form. Whenever that bomb exploded, he decided to stay in his superhero form all these years, and maybe it twisted his mind a little bit, being better than everybody. You get a little bit of those implications here.
It's a beautiful drawing too. Like he's kind of like levitating, and his head's really, and like I've seen in like when Marvel reprinted all this stuff, they talk about how like Gary Leach and probably Alan Moore was in this decision, of course, too, was to like make him look like Tony Perkins from Psycho. And around this time, Psycho 2 was coming out, so it's kind of, he kind of has that look to him.
That's perfect. It's like uplit, like a old kind of horror movie.
Yeah.
And that's what we were talking about, just really teasing the next issue.
Yeah, it's a great cliffhanger.
Now keep in mind, all this stuff that we just talked about happens in the course of like 28, 32 pages. That's what I'm talking about. Like these guys really show and prove, have a lot of respect for the reader, and put a lot of good ideas out there, front and center, right off the bat. It's one of those things that Kirby was great with doing, man. His first issues, every page introducing something fresh.
Obviously, like these decisions were made because it's like, okay, we got 7 pages or 8 pages to tell our story. We got to really deliver.
Yeah.
But then when you take it out of the necessity and then put it in this format where that's no longer a necessity, you see that, oh, that works really well in a 20 or 30 page story too, so maybe we can make things denser than we thought we could. And even like the words are very small too. The words are like smaller than a typical comic too. So it's like, oh, I guess it's okay. You can put that many words.
He makes good use of these words too. There's a whenever Johnny Bates, yeah. Yeah, whenever Johnny Bates gives
Master Bates, as he's referred to in later.
Of course, he gives the initial call to Mike Moran, and we just hear Mike's side of the conversation. Johnny, are you serious? Oh, on the phone? Meaning
don't talk, let's not talk. Yeah, the FBI is listening.
And you get that. You get that. He chooses the perfect freaking words for these dialogue bubbles. There's so much to learn here, man.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned, these 6-page bits and what they had to kind of cram in there and all of that. Whenever Mike pushes Johnny off of the terrace, it's not the most clear composition.
Yeah.
And I get the impression that maybe more like realized that. So in the very next panel, it's the most comic booky kind of sentence of like the more modern day Miracleman, where the wife goes, "Mike, you pushed him off the terrace."
Yeah, right. As he's pushing him off. As he gets pushed off the terrace. Yeah.
Yeah, and that is to sell the reader on what they just saw, because it isn't necessarily that clear. With the way they had to compose the page, they didn't have the benefit of having like a long kind of vertical,
right? Yeah,
where you could show little silhouettes getting pushed off of a terrace. Like it was a very clustered page and a very small square that Gary Leach had to work with.
Yeah, this issue, like we talked about this with like Miller and Dark Knight, but like with this, there are some pages and panels and things where it is kind of unclear what's going on, and this is like a comic like Dark Knight that I've read for years, again and again, returned to again and again, where it's like in early readings I didn't understand this part or this part or this part, but there's like enough going on that you do get, that you can kind of put that other stuff aside, for later readings where you eventually do.
Heck of a first issue.
Yeah.
I think we should unpack future Miraclemans.
For sure.
If you're interested in us continuing down this path with Miracleman, you'll put something in the comments. You'll hit the thumbs up button. We'll be very mindful of the response to any of our Read More Comics videos, and we will act accordingly, because I have a good time reading any of this stuff. Yeah. I could take or leave any of it.
Love reading it, love talking about it.
But we need to get back to making our own comics. So Kayfabers, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and follow the YouTube channel if you've not done so. Hit the bell icon. It'll notify you whenever we have new videos available. You can support the channel by hitting our Spreadshop link in the description below. So we're going to go back to making our comics, but you know what your marching orders are. Tell them.
Read more comics.
Moore.